Keep your blaster, Pritchard." Physically, the mule could not dominate any situation, but Pritchard felt an instantaneous mental flood of cool vigor engulf him. "Do you mind if I sit down?" the mule said. "Both of you have explained some facts in your own individual ways, but not all. I, if you can spare me the time, will explain all, and in a rather short time, so there is little threat of boredom. Sit down, Pritchard, and give me your blaster. There is no danger of attack on us any longer, none from in here, and none from out there. None, in fact, even from the second foundation, thanks to you, Channis." The mule addressed Pritchard with a startling speed and directness. We can reasonably assume that that was what I was expecting to happen. But since I did not gain the knowledge straight from him, something must have been preventing me. Those are facts. Channis, of course, knows the answer. So do I. Do you see it, Pritchard? Pritchard said doggedly, "No, sir." "Then I'll explain. Only one kind of man can both know the location of the second foundation and prevent me from learning it. Channis, I'm afraid you're not actually a trader. You are, rather, a second foundationer." Channis said stiffly, "What is your direct evidence?" "I told you that my men had been tampered with," said the mule. "The tamperer must have been obviously someone who was unconverted and fairly close to the center of things. The field was large, but not entirely unlimited. You were too successful, Channis. People liked you too much. You got along too well. I wondered. And then I summoned you to take over this expedition. No man of real competence could have avoided a dash of uncertainty upon being offered a job like that. Since your mind did avoid it, it was either a foolish one or a controlled one. It was easy to test the alternatives. I seized your mind at a moment of relaxation and filled it with grief. For just one instant, before you remembered to give in, you resisted. It was all I needed to know. No one could have resisted me, even for that tiny instant, without a control similar to mine." Channis' voice was low and bitter. "Well then, now what?" "Now you die as a second foundationer." And once again Channis stared into the muzzle of a blaster, a muzzle guided this time by a mind as mature as his own and as resistant to force as his own. What followed thereafter is difficult to describe. As the mule's thumb began to push upon the trigger contact, he suddenly realized that a flood of pure, thrilling hatred was cascading upon him from an unexpected direction. It was this new emotional element that jerked his thumb off the contact. Nothing else could have done it. And together with his change of action came complete realization of the new situation. It was a strange tableau. There was the mule, thumb off the blaster, staring intently upon Channis. There was Channis, taut, not quite daring to breathe yet. And there was Pritchard, convulsed, every muscle at the breaking point, every tendon writhing, his face twisted at last out of schooled woodenness into an unrecognizable death mask of hate, his eyes only and entirely and supremely upon the mule. Channis said, "You're between two fires, First Citizen. You can't control two minds simultaneously, not when one of them is mine. So you have your choice. Pritchard is free of your conversion now. I've snapped the bonds. He's the old Pritchard, the one who thinks you're the enemy of all that is free and right and holy, the one who knows you've debased him to helpless adulation for 5 years. I'm holding him back now by suppressing his will, but if you kill me, that ends, and in considerably less time than you could shift your blaster or even your will, he will kill you." The mule did not move. Channis continued, "If you turn to place him under control, to kill him, to do anything, you won't be quick enough to turn again to stop me. So throw down the blaster, and let us be on even terms again, and you can have Pritchard back." The mule sighed. "I made a mistake. It was wrong to have a third party present when I confronted you. It introduced one variable too many. It is a mistake that must be paid for, I suppose." He dropped the blaster carelessly and kicked it to the other end of the room. Simultaneously, Pritchard crumpled into profound sleep. "He'll be normal when he awakes," said the mule indifferently. Just beneath the borders of consciousness, just above the borders of detection, Channis caught a fugitive emotional gleam in the mule's mind, and it was still one of sure and confident triumph. In a test of endurance, Channis knew he would lose, but it was deadly to think that. To betray his emotional weakness was to hand the mule a weapon. Why did the others delay? Was that the source of the mule's confidence? What did his opponent know that he didn't? Channis braked his mental whirling roughly. Above all, it was necessary to gain time. He said, "Since it is decided that I am a second foundationer, suppose you tell me why I came to Tazenda." "Oh, no," and the mule laughed with high-pitched confidence. "I am not Pritcher. I need make no explanations to you. Your game is through, Channis, the game of all of you, of all the men of what used to be the second foundation. Used to be. Used to be. What are you waiting for? You throw words at me desperately, and all the while you speak something in your mind is waiting, and waiting, and waiting, but no one is coming, Channis. None of those you expect, none of your allies. You are alone here, and you will remain alone. You know why? My ships were launched against Tazenda 12 hours ago, and they are quite through with their mission. Tazenda lies in ruins. Its centers of population are wiped out. There was no resistance. The second foundation no longer exists, and I, the queer, ugly weakling, am the ruler of the galaxy." Channis could do nothing but shake his head feebly. "No. No. Yes, yes," mimicked the mule. "And if you are the last second foundationer alive, and you may be, that will not be for long either." Channis howled with the sudden pain of the mule's tearing penetration of the innermost tissues of his mind. The mule drew back and muttered, "Not enough. You do not pass the test, after all. Your despair is pretense. Your fear is not the overwhelming one that attends the destruction of an ideal, but the weak, seeping fear of personal destruction." The mule seized Channis by the throat in a puny grip that Channis was somehow unable to break. "Have I calculated rightly, Channis? Have I outwitted your men of the second foundation? Tazenda's destroyed, tremendously destroyed, so why is your despair pretense? Where is the reality? I must have reality and truth. Talk, Channis, talk. Have I penetrated, then, not deeply enough? Does the danger still exist? Talk, Channis. Where have I gone wrong?" Channis felt the words dragged out of his mouth, pulled out by force, tearing his throat and tongue and teeth. "Selden founded second foundation here. Psychologists arrived, took control of the native population of Tazenda." The mule plunged deeply into the other's emotions, tearing at them brutally. "It is Tazenda I have destroyed. You know what I want. Give it to me." "Not Tazenda," squeaked Channis. "Tazenda is the figurehead. Rossum is the world." The mule loosed his grip, and Channis dropped into a huddle of pain and torture. "And you thought to fool me," said the mule softly. "You were fooled." It was the last dying shred of resistance in Channis. He felt an excruciating darkness rise against him. Then a cracking sensation like the jagged glare of a lightning flash. His head ached unbearably, but obviously he was still alive. Slowly he felt comfort suck in from outside. Slowly he bent his neck, and relief was a sharp pang. For the door was open, and the first speaker stood just inside the threshold. Channis felt the first speaker's mental influence move gently over his mind with a healing touch. Baring his teeth in a ferocious smile, the mule said, "Another comes to greet me. Or perhaps there is more than one?" The first speaker said, "I am thoroughly alone. It is necessary I be alone, since it was I who miscalculated your future 5 years ago. There will be a certain satisfaction in correcting the matter without aid." The mule was scornful. "Have you come to add your brain splinter to that of yonder cracked pillar of your realm?" The first speaker smiled. "Why, the man you call Baal, Channis, performed his mission well, the more so since he was hardly your mental equal. You have mistreated him, and yet it may be that we can fully restore him. He is a brave man, sir. He volunteered for this mission, although we were able to predict the huge chance of damage to his mind." The mule was calm. You know, of course, of the destruction of Tazenda.
I do. The assault by your fleet was foreseen.
But not prevented, eh?
No, not prevented, said the first speaker, his self-disgust apparent. And the fault is much more mine than yours. Emotional contact such as you and I possess is not a very new development, you know. Most humans read emotion in a primitive manner, though the faculty of direct emotional contact atrophied with the development of speech. It has been the great advance of our second foundation that this forgotten sense has been restored to at least some of its potentialities. But we are not born with its full use. 1,000,000 years of decay is a formidable obstacle, and we must educate the sense, exercise it as we exercise our muscles. And there you have the main difference. You were born with it. So much we could calculate. We could also calculate the effect of such a sense upon a person in a world of men who did not possess it, the seeing man in the kingdom of the blind. We calculated the extent to which megalomania would take control of you, and we thought we were prepared. But for two factors we were not prepared. The first was the great extent of your sense. We can induce emotional contact only when we see the object of our attention, which is why we are more helpless against physical weapons than you might think. Not so with you. You are known to have had intimate emotional contact with others when out of sight and out of earshot. That was discovered too late. Secondly, we did not know of your physical shortcomings, particularly the one that seemed so important to you that you adopted the name of the Mule. We didn't foresee that you were not merely a mutant, but a sterile mutant, and the added psychic distortion due to your inferiority complex passed us by. We allowed only for megalomania, not for an intensely psychopathic paranoia as well. It is I who bear the responsibility for having missed all that, for I was the leader of the second foundation when you captured Calgon. When you destroyed the first foundation, we found out, but too late, and for that fault millions have died on Tazenda.
And you will correct things now? The mule's thin lips curled, his mind pulsed with hate. What will you do? Fatten me? Restore me to a masculine vigor? Take away from my past the long childhood in an alien environment? Do you regret my sufferings? I have no sorrow for what I did in my necessity. Let the galaxy protect itself as best it can, since it stirred not a whit for my protection when I needed it. No, I regret the millions who have died no more than the 100,000 who will die on Rossum.
On Rossum,
said the first speaker quickly. He turned to Channis, who had forced himself into a half-sitting posture and now managed to say, Sir, I have failed completely. He forced it from me. He knows Tazenda is not the second foundation. He knows that Rossum is. The first speaker frowned.
I see. He turned to the mule. What is it you are planning to do?
What do you think? All this time that you've been preaching to me, I have been working. My mind has been in contact with my fleet, and it has its orders. In 6 hours, all of Rossum will be destroyed except this lone village. Do you think you can stop me? What weapon have you against my mind, against my ships?
What have I? Why, nothing, except a little grain of knowledge that even yet you do not possess. Poor mutant. Ask yourself why Baal Channis was sent to Calgon as a decoy. Baal Channis, your obvious mental inferior. Why didn't I go, or another of our leaders who would have been more your match?
Perhaps, came the supremely confident reply, you were not sufficiently foolish.
The true reason is more logical, said the first speaker. You knew Channis to be a second foundationer. He lacked the capacity to hide that from you, and you knew, too, that you were his superior, so you were not afraid to play his game and follow him as he wished you to in order to outwit him later. And had you remained on Calgon, not all the force of the second foundation could have harmed you, surrounded as you were by your men, your machines, and your mental powers.
My mental powers are with me yet, and my men and machines are not far off.
But you are not on Calgon, sir, and you have not found the second foundation. Do you know what sort of volunteer Baal Channis was? Before he left our foundation for Calgon, he submitted to emotional surgery of a drastic nature. Baal Channis was himself deceived, of necessity and voluntarily. Down to the inmost core of his mind, Baal Chanus honestly believes that Rossum is the second foundation.
The mule was bursting out of his skin. "You dare tell me that Rossum is not the second foundation?" Chanus from the floor let out one long, incredulous cry. "You mean Rossum is not the second foundation?" The memories of life, the knowledge of his mind, everything whirled mistily about him in confusion. The first speaker smiled at the mule.
"Of course Rossum is not the second foundation. Are we madmen, then, to lead you, our greatest, most powerful, most dangerous enemy, to our own world? Oh, no. Let your fleet bombard Rossum first, citizen, if you must have it so. Let them destroy all they can. At most they can kill only Chanus and myself, and that will leave you in a situation improved not in the least. For the second foundation's expedition to Rossum, which has been here for 3 years, and has functioned temporarily as elders in this village, embarked yesterday for Calgan. They will evade your fleet, of course, and they will arrive in Calgan at least a day before you can. When you return, you will find an empire in revolt and a disintegrated realm. Only the men in your fleet here with you now will be loyal to you, and they will be hopelessly outnumbered. The men of the second foundation will see to it that you reconvert no one. Your empire is done, mutant."
The mule bowed his head as anger and despair cornered his mind completely. "Yes, too late, too late. Now I see it."
"Now you see it," agreed the first speaker, "and now you don't."
In the despair of that moment, when the mule's mind lay open, the first speaker, ready for the moment and sure of its nature, entered quickly. It required an insignificant fraction of a second to consummate the change. The mule looked up and said, "Then I shall return to Calgan."
"Certainly. How do you feel?"
"Excellently well." His brow puckered. "Who are you?"
"Does it matter?"
"Of course not." The mule dismissed the matter, crossed the room, and touched Han Pritcher's shoulder. "Wake up, Pritcher. We're going home." Two hours later, Baal Chanus felt strong enough to speak. "He won't ever remember?" he asked.
"Never," the first speaker answered. "He retains his mental powers and his empire, but his motivations are now entirely different. The notion of a second foundation is a blank to him, and he is a man of peace."
"And is it true that Rossum is not the second foundation? I could swear, I tell you, I know it is. I am not mad."
"You are not mad, Chanus, merely changed. Rossum is not the second foundation. Come, we too will return home."
Baal Chanus lay in the small white-tiled room and allowed his mind to relax. He was content to live in the present. There were the walls and the windows and the grass outside. There was the nurse who brought him his food. And then one day he knew that he was in a hospital. He sat up. "What's happening?" The first speaker was beside him.
"You're on the second foundation, and you have your mind back, your original mind."
Yes, yes! Chanus came to the realization that he was himself, and there was an incredible triumph and joy in that.
"And now tell me," said the first speaker, "do you know where the second foundation is?"
And the truth came flooding down in one enormous wave, and Chanus did not answer. Like Ebbling Miz before him, he was only conscious of a vast, numbing surprise, until he finally nodded and said, "By the stars of the galaxy, now I know."
Encyclopedia Galactica entry. Darrell, Arcady, writer. Arcady Darrell is best known for her biography of her grandmother, Beta Darrell, which has for centuries served as a primary source of information concerning the mule and his times. Her novel, Time and Over, is a stirring reflection of the brilliant Calganian society of the early interregnum, based, it is said,
on a visit to Calgan in her youth. Arcadia Darrell declaimed firmly into the mouthpiece of her transcriber, "The Future of Selden's Plan" by A. Darrell. It was her theme for tomorrow's composition and rhetoric class. When she was a great writer, she would write her masterpieces under the pseudonym of Arcady. Arcadia was a little girl's name. Now that she was 2 days past 14, you'd think people would recognize the simple fact of adulthood and call her Arcady. The transcriber, with its graceful capitals and its faintly violet paper with the peach left margin line, had been delivered 2 days ago on her birthday. She thought again how much she loved it. She continued, "The Foundation's past history is largely the past history of the great plan of Harry Seldon. The two are one. But the question in the minds of many people today is whether the plan is still valid or whether it has been foully destroyed. After the Foundation defeated the remnants of the Empire led by its last great general, Bel Rios, it seemed that nothing could stop Seldon's plan to cut short the period of chaos between the fall of the First Galactic Empire and the establishment of the Second Empire. But then, with the last remnants of the dead First Empire gone," Arcadia's breath came short at this point, and she hissed the words between her teeth. But the transcriber simply wrote her words calmly and gracefully. "There came the mule. With breathtaking swiftness, this strange mutant became conqueror and empire builder, until finally he defeated the Foundation itself. Yet he never obtained universal dominion, for in his first overpowering lunge he was stopped by the wisdom and daring of a great woman." Father would insist that she never bring up the fact that she was the grandchild of Beta Darrell, but everyone knew it, and Beta was just about the greatest woman there ever was, and she had stopped the mule single-handed. Arcadia shrugged and continued. "After 5 years of the mule's rule, another change took place, the reasons for which are not known, and the mule abandoned all plans for further conquest. His last 5 years were those of an enlightened despot. It is said by some that the change in the mule was brought about by the intervention of the Second Foundation. However, no one has ever discovered the exact location of this other foundation, nor does anyone know its exact function, so that theory remains unproven. What of the future, now that the mule has come and gone and we are in the 4th century of the millennium? The mule interrupted Seldon's plan, yet as soon as he died, our Foundation rose again here on Terminus, like a nova from the ashes of a dying star. Was this planned? Is Seldon's great dream still alive, and will a second galactic empire still be formed 600 years from now? There is no reason to fear failure, unless it is true that the Second Foundation itself presents a danger. Those who think so have no evidence to back their claim, but merely vague fears and superstitions." This was as far as Arcadia got with the future of Seldon's plan, because there came a tap at the window, and she found herself confronted by a smiling face with a finger at its lips. After taking the slight pause necessary to assume an attitude of bepuzzlement, Arcadia rose and walked to the couch that fronted the window and, kneeling upon it, stared out thoughtfully. She touched the contact that moved the lower third of the window smoothly into its socket in the wall, allowing the warm spring air to interfere with the conditioning within. "You can't get in," she said with a comfortable smugness. "All the windows are screened, and they're keyed only to people who belong here." "Well, in that case," said the man at the window, "will you shut off the screen and let me in? This is Dr. Darrell's house, isn't it?" "Why should I tell you?" "Oh, galaxy. Goodbye. If you jump off, young man—" This was intended as sophisticated irony, since the intruder was 30 at least. Quite elderly, in fact. "I will personally give the alarm." A long pause. Then he said, "Well now, my girl, if you don't want me to stay, and you don't want me to go, what do you want me to do?" "You can come in, I suppose. Dr. Darrell does live here. He's expecting you. I'll shut off the screen now." Arcadia lowered the window the rest of the way, and the young man warily poked his hand through the space, then clambered into the room. "How did you know your father was expecting me?" he asked. "Oh, that was easy. Last week he received a personal capsule, keyed to him personally with a self-oxidizing message, you know. He threw the capsule in the trash descendo, and this afternoon he made up the bed in the spare room. So I knew he expected somebody that I wasn't supposed to know anything about. Usually he tells me everything." "Really, I'm surprised he has to. I should think you'd know everything before he tells you." "I usually do," she laughed. She was beginning to feel very much at ease. The visitor was very distinguished-looking, with curly brown hair and very blue eyes. "Let me introduce myself," he said. "I'm Peleus Anthor. I'm Arcady Darrell. I'll call my father now without taking my eyes off you, of course." And she stamped on the floor. There came the sound of hurrying footsteps in the hall, and the door was flung open. "Arcadia—" There was a tiny explosion of exhaled air, and Dr. Darrell said, "Who are you, sir?" Peleus said in what was quite obviously relief, "Dr. Torrin Darrell. I'm Peleus Anthor. You've received word about me, I think. At least your daughter says you have." "My daughter says I have." Dr. Darrell bent a frowning glance at his daughter. "Well, I have been expecting you. Would you mind coming down with me, please?" "Really, Father," said Arcadia in her loftiest adult manner, "you can speak perfectly freely in front of me." "Arcadia, nobody wants your opinion on matters you know nothing of." "I do so know about the second foundation." There was a silence. In spite of herself, Arcadia felt a little nervousness stirring in her abdomen. Dr. Darrell said softly, "Where have you heard this?" "Nowhere, but what else is there to be so secret about? And you don't have to worry that I'll tell anyone." "Mr. Anthor," said Dr. Darrell, "I must apologize for all this." "Oh, that's all right," came Anthor's rather hollow response. "It's not your fault if she's sold herself to the forces of darkness." The first speaker was alone in the room that contained the prime radiant, an object which held in its vitals the complete Selden plan. The first speaker was the 12th in the line of chief guardians of the plan. His predecessor had beaten the mule, but the wreckage of that gigantic struggle still littered the path of the plan. For 40 years the Second Foundation had been trying to force a galaxy of stubborn and stupid human beings back to the path. It was a terrible task. The first speaker looked up at the opening door. A young man stood there uncertainly, so that the first speaker had to walk to him and lead him in. The student smiled shyly, and the first speaker responded by saying, "First, I must tell you why you're here. You have studied mental science hard and well for most of your life. It is time for you and a few others like you to begin your apprenticeship for speakerhood." Agitation from the student. "No, you must take this phlegmatically. You knew you would qualify, but you hesitated to admit the fact because such knowledge might stamp you as cocksure and therefore unfit. Nonsense. It is part of your qualification that you knew you would qualify." Relaxation from the student. The first speaker went on. "It is not an easy thing to be a speaker. It is not an easy thing to be a psychohistorian in the first place, and not even the best psychohistorian need necessarily qualify to be a speaker. There is a distinction here. A speaker must not only be aware of the mathematical intricacies of the Selden plan, he must have a sympathy for it and for its ends. He must love the plan. To him it must be life and breath." The first speaker's hand hovered gently over the black, shining cube in the middle of the table. "Do you know what this is?" "No, Speaker, I do not." "You have heard of the prime radiant." This? The student was astonished. "You expected something more noble and awe-inspiring. Well, that is natural. The prime radiant was created in the days of the Empire by men of Selden's time. For nearly 400 years it has served our needs perfectly without requiring repairs or adjustment, which is fortunate since none of the Second Foundation is qualified to handle it in any technical fashion." The first speaker depressed a lever, and the room was in darkness. Then, as the two longest walls of the room gradually glowed to life, the student saw fine, neatly printed mathematical equations in black, with an occasional red hairline that wavered through the darker forest like a staggering rillet. "Come, my boy, step here before the wall. You will not cast a shadow. This light does not emanate from the radiant in any ordinary manner." They stood together in the light. The writing was small and covered every inch of the 30-foot-long walls. "This is not the whole plan," said the first speaker. "What you now see represents the main portions of the plan till now. Finished work of art, is it not?" "Definitely." "Wrong. It is not. That is the first lesson you must unlearn. The Selden plan is neither complete nor correct. It is merely the best that could have been done at the time it was created. With the knowledge we have accumulated over the centuries, we could improve on the plan." The student appeared a little shocked. "It is not blasphemy," the first speaker said. "Every red mark you see on the wall is the contribution of a man who lived since Selden. Before you obtain speakerhood, you yourself will have to make an original contribution to the plan. He raised the lever he had depressed, and the walls went blank again.
"Sit down here at the desk, my boy, and let me talk to you. A speaker must be able to discuss the plan without mathematics. If not the plan itself, at least its philosophy and its aims. First of all, what is the aim of the plan? Please tell me in your own words. You won't be judged on polish or suavity."
The student hesitated before saying diffidently, "I believe it is the intention of the plan to establish a human civilization oriented differently from any that has existed before, oriented, furthermore, in a way that possesses no significant probability of spontaneously coming to pass."
"What is this orientation?" asked the first speaker.
"It is that of a civilization based on mental science," said the student. "In all the known history of humankind, advances have been made primarily in physical technology, in the capacity of handling the inanimate world. Control of self and society has been left to chance or to the vague gropings of ethical systems. As a result, no culture of great stability has ever existed."
"And why must this mental science orientation be a non-spontaneous one?" the first speaker asked.
"Because although a large minority of human beings are mentally equipped to take part in the advance of physical science, and all receive the crude and visible benefits thereof, only an insignificant minority are able to understand the greater but more subtle and less apparent involvements of mental science."
"What, then, is the solution?"
"The solution is the Selden Plan. 600 years from now, a second galactic empire will be established, in which humankind will be ready for the leadership of mental science. At that time, the second foundation in its development will bring forth a group of psychologists ready to assume leadership. The first foundation will supply the physical framework of a single political unit, and the second foundation will supply the mental framework of a ready-made ruling class."
"I see," said the first speaker. "And in view of all this, why is it necessary that the second foundation be hidden, above all, from the first foundation?"
The student was troubled in his answer. If a sizable group of human beings learned of the key details of the plan, their actions would be governed by that knowledge, and would no longer be random and predictable. Your pardon, Speaker, but I feel that the answer is not satisfactory."
"It is well that you do. Your answer is quite incomplete. It is the second foundation itself which must be hidden, not simply the plan. The second empire is not yet formed. We still have a society which would resent a ruling class of psychologists, and which would fear its development and fight against it. Do you understand that?"
"Yes, Speaker, I do. The point has never been stressed."
"Don't equivocate. You should be capable of deducing it yourself. You will see me again in a week. By that time, I would like your comments on the following problem."
The first speaker placed a viewer before the student. Both bent their heads to study it.
"You have here a fork in the plan, at a period in time of about half a century ago. You will note that the path followed by the assumed reality diverges from all the plotted predictions, its probability being under 1%. You will estimate for how long the divergence may continue before it becomes uncorrectable. Estimate also the probable end if uncorrected, and a reasonable method of correction."
The student stared at the tiny screen. He said, "Why this particular problem, Speaker? It obviously has significance beyond the purely academic."
"Thank you, my boy. You are as quick as I had expected. The problem is not hypothetical. Nearly half a century ago, the mule burst into galactic history, and for 5 years he was the largest single fact in the universe. He was unprovided for, uncalculated for. He bent the plan seriously, but not fatally. To stop him before he did become fatal, however, we were forced to take active part against him. We revealed our existence, and infinitely worse, a portion of our power. The first foundation has learned of us, and their actions are now predicated on that knowledge. Observe the problem presented, here and here. Naturally, you will not speak of this to anyone."
There was an appalled pause, as realization seeped into the student. He said, "Then the Selden Plan has failed."
"Not yet,"
said the first speaker. For Dr. Darrell and Peleus Anthor, the week passed in pleasant unimportance, the evenings in friendly conversation. When the infrequent visitor happened by, Dr. Darrell would introduce the young man as a cousin from across space, and interest was dulled by the cliché. Sometimes, however, at the end of an ordinary call over the communiwave, a casual invitation would be issued. "Want you to meet my cousin." As for Arcadia, her preparations proceeded in their own manner. In fact, her actions might be considered the least straightforward of all. She induced a friend, one with a home workshop, to lend her a home-built, self-contained sound receiver. Then, when the 7th evening came and 5 men sat talking in the Darrell living room, she reverently placed this object on the desk in her bedroom. Dr. Darrell was speaking to Anthor and 3 new men, Joel Turbor, Visicaster, Dr. Elvit Simic, Professor Emeritus of Physics at the University, and Homir Munn, librarian. Dr. Darrell said, "As you may have guessed, gentlemen, this gathering has been arranged for more than merely social reasons. There is some danger involved." Elvit Simic said, "Oh, get on with it. Tell us about the youngster." Arcadia bent over the voices coming a bit screechily out of the box. Dr. Darrell said, "His name is Peleus Anthor. He was a student of my old colleague, Cleiss. Before he died last year, Cleiss sent me Anthor's brain pattern to the 5th sublevel, and I've checked it against that of the man before you. You know, of course, that a brain pattern cannot be duplicated that far, even by men of the science of psychology." Turbor said, purse-lipped, "We'll take your word for it, especially since you're the greatest electroneurologist in the galaxy now that Cleiss is dead. At least that's the way I've described you in my Visicasts. Are you an electroneurologist too, Anthor?" "Just a student of the science," said Anthor. "But I work hard. I've had the benefit of Kleiss's training. And now, before we can get started, I must request brainwave data." Darrell frowned. "What is this, Anthor? What brainwave data do you refer to?" "The patterns of all of you," said Anthor. "You've taken mine. I must take yours, and I must take the measurements myself." Turbor said, "There's no reason for him to trust us, Darrell. The young man is within his rights." "Thank you," said Anthor. "If you'll lead the way to your laboratory, then, Dr. Darrell, we'll proceed. I took the liberty this morning of checking your apparatus." Darrell went first, then Dr. Simic, then Turbor, then Munn. All sat quietly and unemotionally through the 15-minute process. "And now," said Darrell, when all was done. "And now," said Anthor apologetically, "there is one more person in the house. I cannot proceed without analyzing your daughter." Darrell shrugged and climbed the stairs. Arcadia, amply warned, had the sound receiver off when he entered. 20 minutes later she was back in her room with the device turned back on. The first words she heard were Anthor's. "The analysis, gentlemen, are all satisfactory. The child's as well. There is no evidence of any artificial tampering by the Second Foundation. Now, Dr. Darrell, if you please, tell me why you stopped working with Dr. Cleiss." There was a pause. Darrell said brusquely, "Because there was no point to Kleiss's battle. He was competing with an adversary too strong for him. He was detecting what he and I, knew he would detect, that we were not our own masters. Then he died. He knew he would. He told me half a year before that he was getting too close." "Now, we're too close, too, aren't we?" Munn said with his usual stammer. "Yes," said Anthor flatly. "It's why we've all been chosen. I'm Kleiss's student. Dr. Darrell was his colleague. Joel Turbor has been denouncing our blind faith in the saving hand of the Second Foundation on the air, until the government shut him off, through the agency, I might add, of a powerful financier whose brain shows what Cleiss used to call the Tamper Plateau. Homir Munn has the largest home collection of Muliana, if I may use the phrase to signify collected data concerning the mule, in existence, and has published some papers containing speculation on the nature and function of the Second Foundation. Dr. Simic has contributed as much as anyone to the mathematics of encephalographic analysis. So, we know where we stand. We 5 have nothing to lose and stand to gain much. With every increase in our knowledge, we can propel ourselves in safe directions." "If you don't mind," interrupted Homir Munn, "I don't see what you think you're doing. This is very childish. Brain waves and mumbo-jumbo and all that. Is there just one thing you intend to do?" Peleus Anthor's eyes were bright. "Yes, there is. We need more information on the Second Foundation. In my opinion, that information lies on Calgan." "Calgan?" Munn was bewildered. "The mule's old capital?" Precisely. Calgan is ruled at the moment by a man called Stettin, who calls himself first citizen and considers himself the successor of the mule. The mule's greatness and superhumanity are taken for granted on that world. As a result, his old palace is maintained as a shrine. No unauthorized person may enter. Nothing within has ever been touched. Well, why is that so? At times like these, nothing happens without a reason. What if it is not reverence only that makes the mule's palace inviolate? What if the second foundation has so arranged matters? In short, what if the results of the mule's 5-year search for the second foundation are within— Oh, poppycock! Why not? Demanded Anthor. Throughout its history, the second foundation has hidden itself and interfered in galactic affairs in minimal fashion only. I know that to us it would seem more logical to destroy the palace, or at least remove the data. But these master psychologists would never destroy or remove when they could achieve their ends by creating a state of mind. Don't you agree? There was no immediate answer. Anthor continued. And you, Mun, are just the one to get the information we need. I can't do such a thing. I'm no man of action. I'm a librarian. If I can help you that way, all right, I'll risk the second foundation. But I'm not going out into space on some quixotic mission. Now look, said Anthor patiently. Dr. Darrell and I have agreed that you're the man because you're a librarian. You already have the greatest collection of material on the mule in the galaxy. It is natural for you to want more natural for you than for anyone else. You could request entrance to the Calgan Palace without arousing suspicion. You might be refused, but you would not be suspected. Mun looked about in helpless rebellion. In the end, 2 decisions were made in Dr. Darrell's house that night. The first was Mun's decision to take off into space as soon as his summer vacation began. The other, more secret, more unauthorized decision was made by a thoroughly unofficial member of the gathering as she clicked off her sound receiver and composed herself for sleep. A week had passed on the second foundation, and the first speaker was smiling once again upon the student. You must have brought me interesting results, or you would not be so filled with anger. Speaker, it has become apparent to me that a gross overall change has taken place in the basic psychology of the first foundation. As long as they knew of the existence of a Selden plan, without knowing any of the details thereof, they were confident but uncertain. They knew they would succeed, but they didn't know when or how, so they continued to strive at maximum potential. But now they know of the existence of a second foundation in what amounts to detail, rather merely than as an ancient and vague statement of Selden's. They know that an agency exists which watches their every step and will not let them fall. So they abandon their purposeful stride, and their abandonment of effort, their lapse into a decadent and hedonistic culture, means the ruin of the plan. Is that all? Asked the first speaker. No, there is more. The majority reaction is as described, but a great probability exists for a minority reaction. Knowledge of our guardianship and our control will rouse among a few not complacence, but hostility. Confronted with the risk of domination by a second foundation, a few will turn away from the physical sciences and try to become psychologists. It will be a basic incompatibility with the plan. The first speaker spoke seriously. You feel shocked and angry, my young man. Then you find no solution at all to the problem. The student shook his head and said hopelessly, None. Well, it is not surprising. Listen to me. A course of action exists and has been followed for over a decade. It involves low probabilities, dangerous assumptions. We have even been forced to deal with individual reactions at times. You see, for the first time in the history of the plan, it is possible for the unexpected actions of a single, ordinary individual to destroy it. And I will not conceal the worst. If we are discovered here on this world, it will not only be the plan that is destroyed, but ourselves, our physical selves. The student was disconsolate. The course of action you have described does not sound like a solution at all, but like a desperate guess. No, let us say, an intelligent guess. When is the crisis, Speaker? When will we know whether we have succeeded or not? Within the year, no doubt. The student nodded his head. It's good to know. He shook hands with the speaker, turned on his heel, and left. The first speaker stood in silence. A year would pass quickly. Would any of them, any of Selden's heritage, be alive at its end?